Hello and welcome to Sleepy Scientist. I'm glad you're here, whether you've had a long day, a busy mind, or you simply love falling asleep to the sound of science. Tonight we step softly into a place both mesmerizing and formidable, where the earth wears its molten heart openly and rivers of fire drift lazily endlessly in their glowing pools. Imagine standing on the edge of a crater, the rim warmed beneath your feet, a gentle tremor in the ground that feels almost like a heartbeat. The sky stretches wide above you, a muted canvas, ready to catch reflections of orange, red, and gold, each ripple in the lake, painting the air with light. If you feel like it, pause for a moment and note your own location and the hour of your day. Somewhere across the world, someone else might be settling in for the same kind of sleepy journey, and for a brief quiet instant, your awareness brushes theirs. You are at the threshold of a lava lake, a rare and restless marvel. These pools are molten rock-made liquid, by temperatures reaching up to 1,200 degrees Celsius, hotter than any oven you've ever approached, hotter than the metal in a blacksmith's forge. Yet somehow the surface cools enough to form a thin crust, delicate as glass, that floats on the churning heart beneath. It crackles and groans with every movement, folding over itself like a living skin that knows more secrets than any library ever could. You might find yourself asking, could I step closer and hear its heartbeat? Or how does this lake manage to stay molten for decades? Questions like these are perfect companions here. They drift alongside you as naturally as smoke rises from the lake. The landscape surrounding the lake is an array of textures and sounds. Sharp black rock surrounds the edges, jagged like frozen waves, while occasional vents hiss steam and sulfur into the air, releasing a mineral perfume that tangles with your senses. You breathe deeply, taking in the scent of iron and brimstone, noticing how your lungs fill with the earth's raw aroma. And yet there is an odd calmness here, a rhythm to the chaos, the slow folding of the lava, the subtle shimmer of heat above the surface, even the distant low hum of activity beneath the crust. Each element seems to have its own personality, a mood that shifts gently without warning. This lake is not merely rock and fire. It moves with a purposeful grace, as if it is aware of your gaze, curling around its edges, occasionally spilling a fresh river of light into the crater, like a painter adding final strokes to an endless canvas. Tiny splashes rise in arcs, fleeting sparks that wink and vanish, teasing your senses. You may notice the colors, deep reds, molten oranges, and flashes of fleeting blue, where gas escapes through thinner layers, each hue a word in the lake's unspoken language. As you watch, the lake seems almost alive, breathing and stretching, inviting you to ponder the mysteries of its eternal churn. Ask yourself, if the earth itself could speak, would it choose to roar, whisper, or simply sigh, as you linger on the rim, the heat brushing your cheeks? The glowing liquid before you pulses quietly, a reminder of the immense energy locked beneath our feet. Here on the edge of fire, time feels suspended. The lake's ceaseless boil slows. Your thoughts encourages you to exhale, to notice, to settle into the soft rhythm of molten eternity. If you enjoy these sleepy explorations, I'd be so grateful if you gave the video a little like and tapped that subscribe button. It helps more sleepy scientists like you find their way here, and it means I can keep making more of these journeys for you now. The first impressions of this lake, its sheer scale, its constant motion, its glowing palette, will linger as you step closer. You notice the cracks along the surface, jagged veins that shift and slide, like ancient skin learning new ways to breathe. Each ripple and fold tells a story of the magma's journey from deep within the mantle, traveling tens of kilometers to reach this exposed basin. Beneath the seemingly placid crust, the lake is a cathedral of movement, a quiet orchestra of convection currents, each eddy and swirl precisely tuned, carrying minerals, gases, and heat from the fiery depths. And in this orchestration there is a kind of serenity, a paradoxical calm in relentless motion that invites your mind to wander gently. Some lava lakes, like the ones in East Africa's Rift Valley or the slopes of Kilauea, have remained molten for decades, their surfaces renewing continuously. Imagine the age of the crust beneath your fingertips, each layer telling a story in thousands of overlapping pages. Here, time is folded differently. Minutes stretch like the long, slow limbs of smoke twisting above the surface. You might find yourself considering the persistence of natural processes, marveling at the quiet patience of fire that moves without rush, yet never sleeps. These reflections, like the lake itself, are both grounding and strangely hypnotic. As you settle into the presence of this glowing expanse, you feel the rhythm of the earth in your chest, the lake's heat in your skin, and the subtle scent of sulfur curling around your senses. Every element, sound, color, smell, motion, invites you to slow down, to imagine the stories held in the molten liquid, the slow, geological dance that continues uninterrupted beneath the thin veil of crust. And as your eyes follow the gentle folding waves, your mind begins to mirror the lake, finding calm in motion, curiosity in the constant churn. The moment you take a step closer, the air itself seems to thicken with warmth, wrapping you in an invisible blanket that smells faintly of minerals and fire. This is the first breath of sulfur, the lake's way of announcing its presence. You notice the soft hiss of gas escaping through tiny fissures, each puff curling skyward in delicate twisting columns that almost seem to wave hello. The smell is sharp, but not unpleasant, more like the earth exhaling after centuries of quiet heat, and it lingers on your skin, clinging like a whispered secret. You might ask yourself, how does something so volatile remain so mesmerizing? Why do these gases rise in such graceful arcs rather than erupting chaotically? Sulfur dioxide, the main actor in these aromatic plumes, carries a story of both chemistry and geology. Every breath you take is an olfactory bridge to processes deep within the Earth's crust, where temperatures can exceed 200 degrees Celsius, and molten rock collides with trapped gases in a silent negotiation. Occasionally, faint flecks of yellow sulfur crystallize along cracks, tiny islands of solid that tell you where the lake's moods have shifted in the past few hours. You can almost imagine them as little footprints marking the lava's journey, evidence of its restless nature. The smell is not merely a warning. It is a guide hinting at pockets of intense heat and movement beneath your feet. As you step along the rim, the heat rises in waves radiating not only from the surface, but from the invisible currents below. You can feel the subtle difference in air density, a gentle push that makes hair on your arms quiver. Ask yourself, does the air move because it must, or because it wants to dance around the lake's simmering personality? The sulfur and other gases, hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, play along each swirling plume, a note in a quiet symphony, a language of steam and warmth that your body senses before your mind can name it. The lake's first greeting is not violent, it is patient. Steam rises in lazy curling columns, some white as clouds, some tinged with pale yellow. Each vent seems to have its own character, some whisper softly hissing with a delicate persistence. Others breathe in intermittent bursts like the sighs of a giant who has been napping too long. You might even imagine the lake is conscious in some subtle way, its gaseous exhalations forming sentences that float upward, unreadable yet full of intention. And beneath these whispers, the crust shifts ever so slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of your presence. Temperature measurements taken from similar lava lakes show the air just above the surface can reach 200 to 300 degrees Celsius, enough to make even a cautious approach feel like standing beside an enormous, invisible furnace. You notice how the heat interacts with the air around you, bending light, shimmering like a mirage, and occasionally causing your shadow to ripple across the jagged rock. Tiny tremors travel through the rim vibrations from the movement of the lake's interior that tickle your feet and remind you of the immense unseen forces at work. Ask yourself, how far below the surface does the magma pulse before it touches this crust? How much of the lake's personality is hidden beneath what we can see and smell? If you lean over the rim, carefully observing the shifting patterns, you notice streaks in the air where the sulfur mixes with steam, forming a palette of pale yellow-gray and faint blue, each plume twisting as if caught in a secret wind. Occasionally, tiny droplets of molten lava are ejected in miniature geysers, landing with a hiss that sounds almost like applause from the earth itself. You start to sense rhythm here, in both the motion and the smell, a heartbeat made of vapor subtle, yet insistent, reminding you that this lake has been breathing for decades, even centuries in some cases. Some lakes like Urta Ale in Ethiopia have persisted for more than a century, their gases and steam forming a constant veil that communicates the lake's inner life. Imagine standing there, enveloped in the sulfur-tinged air, noticing the way the faint smell wraps around your mind, gently coaxing your thoughts to slow. You can almost hear the mineral particles dancing in invisible eddies, a silent ballet choreographed by heat and pressure. The air, warmed and perfumed, carries a message. This is a living, moving world, and you are now part of its observation, a quiet witness to its patient performance. Even as you breathe in and marvel, the gases rise in continuous spirals, each one unique, each one ephemeral. You notice how some rise straight, others curl and twist, interacting with one another like dancers, meeting briefly before parting ways. There is a subtle lesson in this choreography. Everything, even chaos, has patterns, and these patterns are not merely aesthetic. They are the language of physics, chemistry, and time. Ask yourself, what stories could these gases tell if they could speak? Could you translate the whispering sulfur and the curling steam into the voice of the earth itself? Here at the first intimate encounter with the lake, the world narrows to heat, color, scent, and movement. Your mind relaxes, attuned to rhythm, to the gentle insistence of the lake's presence. You notice the difference between its deliberate breaths and the occasional playful hisses, feeling a soft kinship with a system that has endured for millennia, always active yet always patient. And you realize the first breath of sulfur is more than a smell. It is an invitation, a handshake with fire itself, welcoming you into a space both dangerous and profoundly comforting. The surface of the lake stretches before you, like a restless mirror, folding and cracking in ways that almost seem sentient. This is the living skin of the lava, an ever-changing layer that both protects and reveals the liquid fire beneath. You notice the crust rising and sinking, like a chest, inhaling and exhaling, creaking softly with each movement. Sometimes small plates tilt or slide over one another, exposing the glowing liquid below for a brief, tantalizing moment. You might ask yourself, could this crust be considered the lake's skin, sensing and responding to the world above it? Or is it merely following physics with no awareness at all? The question itself seems to hum with the lake's energy. The crust varies in thickness, from just a few centimeters in some places to over a meter in others, and its textures are astonishingly diverse. Some sections are smooth and glassy, reflecting the surrounding sky like a molten mirror. Others are jagged and fragmented, crumbling in gentle cascades that fall back into the lake with soft, fizzing hisses. Every crack and fold tells a story of heat, escaping gases, struggling upward, and the delicate tension between solid and liquid. You notice how these fissures seem almost intentional, like the lava is stretching its skin to communicate with you in subtle movements. Temperature readings show that while the surface may cool enough to walk near its edges, the molten heart below remains over 1,000 degrees Celsius, churning like a restless ocean. This duality fascinates you. The crust is simultaneously a shield and a veil, giving the impression of solidity while hiding the roiling chaos beneath. As you watch, you can almost see the crust's personality, sometimes cautious, holding itself together, sometimes daring, splitting and revealing the lake's fiery soul. Ask yourself, how does a material so hot behave like a living entity, folding and flexing in such elegant, unpredictable ways? You notice shapes forming in the folding crust, fleeting and fantastical. A plate of lava tips just enough to suggest the outline of a horned creature, then slides back into obscurity, leaving only heat and glow. Another section appears like the arching back of a giant serpent, only to vanish in the next ripple. These shapes are illusions, of course, but they give personality to the lake, as if it is performing private theatrics for anyone paying attention. You start to see the lava not just as molten rock, but as an expressive, almost playful presence, teasing your imagination and inviting reflection. The sound of the crust cracking is subtle, yet hypnotic. Each pop, groan, and hiss resonates in the air, creating a quiet percussion that underscores the lake's constant movement. You lean in closer, feeling the gentle vibrations travel through the rim, and you sense a rhythm like a heartbeat. Sometimes slow and contemplative, sometimes rapid and energetic. The lake seems aware of its own performance, punctuating moments with bursts of energy and brief pauses that allow you to catch your breath. Ask yourself, could listening to these subtle sounds help decode the hidden processes beneath the surface? Is there a pattern to the music of molten rock? Occasionally, the crust breaks apart more dramatically, revealing rivers of glowing lava that snake across the surface. These rivers move slowly, pulling the solid plates along like rafts in a fiery stream. You watch how they interact with other plates, nudging and shoving, merging or splitting apart, a miniature society of molten islands negotiating space and movement. It is mesmerizing, almost meditative, and you begin to understand the crust's role not just as a barrier, but as a dynamic, ever-adapting participant in the lake's life. You also notice that the surface is dotted with tiny domes, blister-like formations that swell as gases escape from below. These domes puff and collapse with a gentle, almost playful motion, like the lava itself is breathing. You might wonder how many of these blisters form each day, and what stories could they tell if they had memory. Their existence reminds you that even in an extreme environment, subtle processes continue unnoticed, each one a small testament to the lake's resilience and complexity. Observing the living skin over time, patterns emerge. Plates drift slowly, fissures open and close, domes rise and collapse, and occasional sparks leap from weak spots in the crust. The lake is patient, yet unpredictable, a paradoxical entity that exists in constant flux. As you watch, the sensation of time begins to blur. Minutes stretch into long, gentle waves, and the lake's pulse becomes a lullaby of motion, color, and heat. It is hypnotic, soothing, and strange, like gazing at a fire that never sleeps, yet never tires of being watched. By now, the crust seems almost like a character with its own temperament, a skin that knows when to reveal and when to conceal. It folds carefully, teasing the glowing magma beneath, creating a dialogue between what is seen and what remains hidden. You begin to realize that the lake is not only alive in the chemical and thermal sense, but alive in the imagination. It sparks the way it evokes wonder, curiosity, and questions that linger long after you've turned away. The living skin is both mask and mirror, a gentle reminder that even in a world of fire, personality and presence can emerge in the most unexpected forms. Beneath the glowing surface, the restless heartbeat of the lava lake thunders silently, a rhythm you cannot hear, but can almost feel in the soles of your feet and the tips of your fingers. The magma beneath is a dense, simmering ocean, moving in convection currents that rise and fall like slow, deliberate breathing. You might imagine the lake as a living entity, its heart pulsing steadily, propelling molten rock from deep within the mantle toward the surface, only to sink again in an endless cycle. Ask yourself, how far down does this pulse travel? And what mysteries lie in the darkness where your eyes cannot follow? The answer is written in temperature gradients, mineral compositions, and the subtle shifts that ripple across the crust. This hidden heart is astonishingly dynamic. Magma chambers beneath lava lakes can extend several kilometers wide and tens of kilometers deep, holding volumes of molten rock that could fill thousands of Olympic swimming pools. As you gaze at the surface, you are witnessing the exterior expression of an immense internal dance. Viscous lava rises, reaches the thin crust, cools slightly, then sinks again, creating a loop that maintains the lake's liquid state. It's a delicate balance orchestrated by heat pressure and the lake's chemistry that allows some lakes to remain molten for decades. Occasionally, the convection manifests in visible phenomena. Small upwellings push the crust upward, forming domes, or hotter currents break through thinner sections, causing splashes of incandescent lava. You notice these movements are not random. They follow subtle patterns dictated by the lake's temperature and density differences. You might wonder, how much does each rise and fall influence the surrounding crust? Each shift is like a heartbeat, sending ripples across the surface and whispering the lake's inner secrets to anyone patient enough to watch. Seismic studies reveal that the heartbeat of these lakes is accompanied by low-frequency tremors, gentle vibrations traveling through the surrounding rock. You can almost sense them now, a steady pulse beneath your feet, synchronizing your awareness with the deep rhythm of the planet. Ask yourself, could standing here long enough allow you to feel the lake's pulse as naturally as your own heartbeat? How might these slow vibrations connect the surface world to the hidden magma ocean below? It's a subtle, calming thought, reminding you that immense energy can exist quietly and consistently, shaping landscapes without fanfare. The chemistry of the molten heart adds another layer to its personality. High concentrations of iron, magnesium, and silica make the magma dense and slow-moving, while dissolved gases like carbon dioxide and sulfur create pressure that occasionally bursts through the crust. These small eruptions are more playful than violent, tiny reminders that the lake is alive, adjusting and communicating through motion. You might even imagine the magma breathing through these vents, releasing excess pressure with tiny sighs that cool into the crust you watch above. You also notice how the magma's temperature is not uniform. Hotter pockets rise more quickly, forming plumes that disturb the surface crust, while cooler, slightly denser regions sink, maintaining a continuous cycle. This constant mixing prevents the lake from solidifying and ensures its glow never fades. You might ask yourself, how long has this rhythm persisted, silently maintaining itself for years or decades without pause? The answer is both astonishing and humbling. The Earth has been perfecting this dance far longer than humans have walked its surface. Some scientists describe the convection currents as a slow-motion ocean with magma currents carving paths beneath the crust as they transport heat and minerals. You can imagine the lava as a patient, thoughtful artist moving its molten brush in invisible strokes that shape the lake above. You feel almost as if the lake is aware of your observation, acknowledging your presence with subtle changes in its pulse, gentle shifts that ripple through the surface, a quiet nod to your curiosity. The heartbeat beneath is not chaotic, it is deliberate. Every upwelling, every downward pull is part of a balance between cooling and reheating, a slow choreography that sustains the lake's molten life. You notice how the crust above seems to respond, folding, cracking, and healing in time with the invisible rhythm. Ask yourself, how often does this dance repeat unnoticed? And what lessons could you draw about patience, persistence, and the hidden forces that shape our world? It's a meditation in movement, a gentle lullaby composed of heat, density, and time. By now you sense a connection to the hidden magma, an unspoken understanding that this lake, in its eternal motion, is both ancient and present. It pulses with life that is patient yet relentless, a reminder that beneath the visible, a steady heartbeat can sustain worlds, shape landscapes, and inspire awe. The restless heart beneath the surface is not only a source of light and heat, it is a silent teacher inviting you to witness the quiet power of persistence and to wonder at the unseen forces that shape our planet with both elegance and inevitability. The colors of the lava lake are a spectacle that seems almost otherworldly, a living kaleidoscope that shifts with every ripple and sigh. You notice deep molten reds dominating the surface, a warm glow that radiates patience and quiet energy. Interspersed among these reds are brilliant oranges, molten like liquid sunlight caught in motion, reflecting the intensity of the heat beneath the thin crust. Occasionally, fleeting blues appear, where gases escape through thinner sections, a brief electric flash against the dominant warmth, like tiny sparks of surprise dancing across a familiar landscape. Ask yourself, why do these colors emerge, and what do they reveal about the lake's secret inner life? These hues are more than just beautiful, they are informative. The red tones indicate temperatures around 1000 degrees to 100 degrees Celsius, while the brightest orange patches often reach 200 degrees. The rare blue flashes occur where sulfur and other gases react at high temperatures, creating luminescent pockets that vanish as quickly as they appear. By observing the shifting colors, you can almost read the lake, understanding which areas are more active, which are resting, and which are in a transient, playful surge. The palette is both aesthetic and educational, a visual diary of the lake's eternal churn. You notice the way the colors blend and interact, forming patterns reminiscent of brush strokes on a cosmic canvas. The glowing reds seem to cradle the oranges, while the occasional blue sparks punctuate the surface like fleeting punctuation marks. Ask yourself, could these visual dances serve as a language of the lava, a way of expressing the invisible currents, temperatures, and pressures beneath? Each flicker is a word, each ripple a sentence, and while we cannot decode it fully, the experience itself is a kind of understanding, a gentle comprehension of natural communication. The surface itself acts as a prism, refracting light in unpredictable ways. You can see subtle gradients as molten plates tilt, creating pockets of shadow and gleam, a shifting mosaic of energy. These contrasts help scientists determine the relative thickness of the crust and the temperature of the underlying magma. You might imagine the lake as a painter, constantly mixing pigments, in real time experimenting with color and adjusting its composition to the rhythm of its unseen heart. Every fold, every crack, and every shimmer contributes to this living artwork. Beyond the surface, the interaction of light with gases adds layers to the spectacle. Steam rises in gentle curtains, sometimes capturing the glow of the lava beneath and diffusing it into a soft, golden haze. This effect amplifies the sense of a living, breathing entity, wrapping the viewer in a luminous cocoon. You notice the air itself seems to shimmer, carrying the reflection of molten colors upward and outward. Ask yourself, could the combination of light, heat, and gas movements be the lake's way of communicating visually with the world around it? Or is it simply physics? Orchestrating beauty without intent, the colors also hint at chemical composition. Iron-rich lava produces deep red hues, while magnesium-rich sections may lean brighter or more orange. Sulfur gases interacting with heat can generate the rare blues and greens that flicker across the surface, adding dynamic accents to the ongoing display. Each color is a signature, a hint at what lies beneath, and observing these hues helps scientists track changes in the lake's activity. You might imagine the lake winking at you in blue, as if sharing a secret of its inner workings. At dusk, the visual experience intensifies. Shadows lengthen along the jagged rim, contrasting sharply with the vibrant, molten palette below. The reds and oranges appear to glow even more fiercely, and the occasional blue spark becomes a striking punctuation in the deepening light. You notice how the lake responds subtly to the fading daylight, the glowing surface asserting itself with quiet confidence, almost aware of the changing environment above. It is as if the lake has a sense of performance, knowing the world is watching, adjusting its display accordingly. Some fleeting patterns catch your attention, swirling reds, forming spirals, cracks, outlining shapes that resemble mythical creatures, and sudden bursts of orange that ripple outward like heartbeat rings in water. These ephemeral moments are never the same, twice a reminder that the lake is a continuous work of art, sculpted by forces far larger and older than yourself. Ask yourself, how many of these patterns exist only for a moment, before vanishing never to be seen again? How does this impermanence affect the way you perceive the lake's personality? Ultimately, the colors of the lava lake are not just decoration. They are alive with information and emotion. Each hue tells a story of a temperature, chemical composition, and motion, while simultaneously evoking wonder, curiosity, and quiet introspection. As you watch, you feel a connection to the Earth's deep energy, sensing both the heat and the personality of a system that has been glowing, shifting, and breathing for centuries. The palette, in its restless beauty, invites you to slow your thoughts. Marvel and wonder at the subtle language of color that only a patient observer can begin to understand. The heat rising from the lake speaks in a language that bypasses words, a tactile conversation with your skin, your hair, even the backs of your knees. You feel waves of warmth rolling across your body, soft yet insistent, carrying a message that is both ancient and immediate. It's a voice without sound, yet you understand it perfectly. The earth is alive, it is moving, and it has been speaking for millennia. You might ask yourself, how does this heat travel from deep below to the surface, and why does it feel so different from the sun's warmth. Unlike sunlight, which bathes you gently, the lake's heat tells a story pressing against your senses in pulses and surges. Temperature readings taken near active lava lakes often show gradients that shift dramatically within just a few meters. Right at the edge, the air may be a toasty 200 degrees Celsius, while just 10 meters away, it can drop to a tolerable 30 or 40 degrees. You notice the warmth bending and shimmering the air around you, creating visual waves and gentle ripples that distort the distant edges of the lake. The heat carries a personality, playful, daring at times, calming in its persistent embrace. Ask yourself, if heat had temperament, how would it behave, and could the lake itself be considered a patient teacher, showing you the subtleties of energy transfer without a single word? As you stand closer, the heat interacts with your senses in layers. There is the immediate tactile warmth brushing your skin, a deep, almost tactile resonance in the air that seems to vibrate gently in your chest, and the subtle effect on your breathing, the way your lungs notice the slightly thinner, denser air tinged with sulfur. This multisensory symphony creates a lulling effect, coaxing you into a slower rhythm, synchronizing your body with the lake's slow, measured energy. You feel both comforted and awed, as if the earth itself is reaching out, bridging a connection between molten heart and human curiosity. Occasionally, pockets of heat intensify briefly, like the lake exhaling a short, concentrated burst. Steam and gases curl upward, shimmering against the sunset or the ambient sky. You notice how these hot pockets affect the crust above, causing gentle ripples and folds. Each fluctuation feels intentional, almost playful, and you can't help but wonder how much of the lake's personality is hidden in these thermal gestures. You start to perceive a dialogue. The heat pushes upward, the crust responds, and your mind, quietly attentive, begins to decode the ebb and flow. The heat also affects the surrounding landscape in subtle ways. Rocks near vents radiate warmth long after the air cools, and distant steam plumes bend in the currents, creating a living mosaic of temperature and movement. Ask yourself, could these subtle shifts in warmth influence the microclimate around the crater, or perhaps even guide the growth of hardy plants at its edges? The Earth's energy reaches farther than the eye can see, and the lake's heat serves as both storyteller and sculptor, shaping the immediate environment without hurry or notice. Scientific measurements reveal fascinating details. The radiant heat from lava lakes can warm the surrounding air and ground tens of meters beyond the visible rim, sometimes generating localized wind currents and updrafts. You feel these currents brushing gently against your face and body, carrying whispers of the lake's inner turmoil outward. Each breath of air seems laced with energy, a gentle pulse from the molten heart beneath, coaxing your awareness to a slower, deeper cadence. Ask yourself, what lessons about energy balance and patience could the Earth be offering in this silent, radiant conversation? Your senses adjust to the pervasive warmth, noticing subtleties you might otherwise miss. A slight increase in the shimmer of distant rocks. The gentle rolling motion of heated air pockets the flickering shadows cast across the jagged rim. The heat is not overwhelming. It is deliberate, lulling rather than frightening. A reminder that immense energy can exist in harmony with observation and care. It is as if the lake has an innate understanding of presence, responding not violently to your curiosity, but gently inviting reflection and calm. At times, the heat feels almost sentient, brushing against your awareness like a living entity. You imagine it as a patient teacher, communicating through tactile waves and shimmering air, showing you patterns in the lava's motion and the subtle interplay between crust and magma. Each breath of warmth is a gentle nudge to notice, to contemplate, and to synchronize with the lake's quiet rhythm. You begin to see heat not merely as a physical phenomenon, but as a language capable of transmitting nuanced mood and energy without uttering a single syllable. By now, the heat has become a companion, a soft presence that underscores the lake's dynamic personality. You feel it pressing lightly, a warm reminder of the hidden forces beneath the surface, coaxing your mind into quiet observation. The lake communicates through temperature, and you, in turn, listen. Each subtle fluctuation, each wave of warmth becomes a syllable in a conversation without words, a meditation on the power, patience, and eternal motion of molten rock. And as you stand enveloped in this invisible, radiant dialogue, you realize that understanding can come not only through sight or sound, but through feeling, through being attuned to the Earth's steady, patient pulse. Above the molten lake, gas plumes rise in slow, deliberate spirals, performing a quiet, elegant dance that captivates both eye and mind. These plumes, white-yellow, sometimes tinged with faint blue curl, and twist, as if aware of the open sky above, weaving their invisible threads into the atmosphere. They are more than just escaping vapor. They are active participants in the lake's personality, expressing its moods with grace and rhythm. You might ask yourself, could these twisting columns be the lake's way of communicating with the world above, sending messages in patterns only nature can decipher? Each plume seems to have its own temperament, some bold and vigorous, others soft and hesitant. The gases themselves carry secrets from deep within the earth. Sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide escape through tiny vents, marking the locations of hotter or more volatile areas in the magma below. Hydrogen sulfide and traces of other compounds mingle in subtle ways, creating wisps of color and texture that appear almost alive. You notice the plumes rising in spirals, curling into columns, sometimes merging and then separating again, like dancers moving in synchrony with an unseen rhythm. Ask yourself, how do the currents of air shape the behavior of these plumes, and how much of their dance is choreographed by the physics of the atmosphere versus the lake's inner energy? Some plumes move faster than others, bending in gentle arcs, teasing the air with playful gestures. You watch as the lighter vapor rises effortlessly, while heavier gases linger closer to the surface, forming transient curtains that ripple over the glowing lava. The interaction between gases and heat creates a soft luminescence in certain spots, where the plumes catch and scatter the fiery glow. It is almost as if the lake is painting with vapor, each puff and twist adding texture to the overall canvas. You might imagine that if you could read the language of these plumes, you would discover subtle narratives, stories of pressure, release of temperature shifts of the lake's internal life. Temperature measurements show that gas plumes can rise tens of meters above the lava, their path influenced by both convection currents and the viscosity of the surrounding air. Some plumes ascend rapidly, punctuating the sky with bright trails of vapor, while others linger lazily curling like smoke from a patient candle. Each plume's behavior offers clues about the magma beneath. Stronger plumes indicate hotter, more volatile pockets, while slower curling columns suggest regions of steadier, calmer convection. Ask yourself, if you could trace every plume back to its origin, how many hidden stories of pressure, heat, and chemical reaction would you uncover? The visual interplay is hypnotic. You notice how the plumes interact with the light, bending and shimmering, sometimes reflecting the reds and oranges of the lake below, creating ghostly ribbons of molten color suspended in the air. Occasional gusts of wind sweep through, scattering the plumes, stretching them into delicate, fleeting arcs before they dissipate. It's a continuous performance, improvised, yet governed by the strict rules of physics, a balance of spontaneity and necessity. You begin to see the plumes as personalities themselves, some curious and daring, others reserved, lingering on the edge before finally letting go. The chemistry of the gases also affects the surrounding atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide reacts with moisture to create faintly acidic mist, while carbon dioxide contributes to subtle density changes in the air, enhancing the visible movement of the plumes. You notice how these interactions bend light, creating delicate color shifts and glimmers that appear and vanish without warning. Ask yourself, could the lake's breath subtly alter the very air around you, shaping microclimates and influencing the immediate environment in ways that are invisible but profound? Sometimes the plumes cluster, forming temporary columns that twist in harmony, almost like a congregation of living spirits. These formations pulse with the lake's internal rhythm, each movement synchronized with unseen convection currents beneath the crust. You watch, mesmerized, as the plumes swirl and stretch, occasionally bursting apart in sudden, playful outbursts, as if teasing gravity itself. This dance is constant, yet never the same, a reminder that even in seemingly predictable, natural systems, surprise and spontaneity are always possible. The scent carried by the plumes is equally expressive. Sulfur, faintly sweet, yet sharp, mixes with the warmth of the lake, creating a perfume that seems to define the personality of the place. Each inhalation connects you more closely to the lake, anchoring your awareness in the interplay of heat, motion, and chemistry. Ask yourself, could this olfactory language, combined with the visual dance of the plumes, be a way the lake conveys its moods, its activity, its quiet persistence? The answer seems to hover in the air, felt rather than spoken. As you observe the twisting vapors, you realize that the lake is speaking through many channels simultaneously, through heat color movement, and now the rising plumes. Each layer adds depth to the story, revealing more of the lake's personality to those willing to notice. The dance of the gas plumes is not just a byproduct of activity, it is a gentle, mesmerizing, and intelligent display of the lake's character, inviting reflection, wonder, and a deepening sense of connection with the molten world before you. Along the edges of the lake, the rim itself seems alive, responding subtly to the heat movement and gases from the molten heart below. Jagged rocks jut upward like the teeth of a slumbering beast, yet they shimmer with a quiet energy, warmed and sometimes softened by proximity to the persistent heat. You notice tiny fractures along the rim where the rock seems to bend and sigh, adjusting minutely, as if accommodating the lake's endless motion. Ask yourself, could the rim be considered an extension of the lake's personality, a patient guardian reacting to the moods of the molten interior? Each crack and crevice carries a history of pressure, cooling, and transformation. The rim also serves as a reflective stage for the molten spectacle. Its dark volcanic surfaces catch the flickering reds and oranges of the lake, amplifying the glow and creating subtle visual echoes. As you move along the edge, you see how heat waves shimmer over the jagged stones, bending light in unpredictable ways. It almost feels like the rocks themselves are breathing, expanding, and contracting in sync with the lake's rhythm. Occasionally, small grains of molten rock fall from weakened sections, sizzling upon contact with cooler stones, adding a soft percussion to the symphony of movement. Weather subtly interacts with the rim as well. Gentle breezes twist and curl around the jagged rocks, carrying heat and gases outward. During moments of calm, you notice the rim holding on to warmth, radiating it slowly back into the air, like a patient companion lingering near a cozy fire. Ask yourself, how much of the local atmosphere is shaped by this constant interaction between molten heart and jagged edge? The rim does more than frame the lake. It mediates energy, directs airflow, and subtly influences temperature and movement in the immediate environment. Some sections of the rim appear almost sculpted, smoothed by centuries of lava flows and chemical erosion. Others are raw and jagged, fractured from repeated cycles of heating expansion and cooling. Tiny mineral deposits glint in the warm air, hints of iron, magnesium, and sulfur that have crystallized over years. You might imagine these stones as quiet archivists, holding records of every ripple, every venting plume, every gentle tremor from the lake below. Each rock has a personality, stoic, playful, patient, or occasionally dramatic, when small collapses send sparks of molten rock onto lower ledges. At certain points, the rim becomes dangerously thin, the crust barely holding together above active lava. You notice subtle depressions and soft spots where heat has weakened the structure, a reminder of the constant negotiation between solid rock and molten core. Ask yourself, how does the lake decide where to push upward, where to maintain pressure, and where to gently let go? Even the most solid-seeming sections are in quiet dialogue with the lake, responding to its pulses and tremors in ways that are invisible, yet profoundly real. Gases venting near the rim create ephemeral microenvironments. Thin plumes of sulfur and carbon dioxide twist upward, sometimes pooling briefly in depressions before being carried away by light winds. These pockets of chemical activity subtly change the coloration of the rocks, leaving streaks of pale yellow-green or white. You notice how the rocks near active vents glow faintly in the reflected heat, almost as if they are blushing at the lake's constant energy. This interaction transforms the rim into a dynamic interface between molten liquid-solid rock and the surrounding atmosphere. You might also notice the way shadows play across the rim. As the sun or even moonlight strikes the jagged surfaces, long dancing silhouettes stretch over the glowing lake, exaggerating the scale and adding depth to the scene. Shadows move gently as heat waves bend the air, creating a dreamlike quality, as if the rim itself is breathing rhythmically with the molten heart below. Ask yourself, how much does perception shape our understanding of these natural features, turning simple rock into expressive landscape? The lake and its rim engage in a subtle, theatrical performance for anyone patient enough to observe. Occasional collapses along the rim send small showers of rock and dust onto lower ledges, or even into the molten lake. These events are not violent eruptions, but measured adjustments, like the earth gently exhaling, realigning its fragile boundaries to accommodate the restless energy beneath. You notice the patterns thicker. Sections absorb more heat and stay solid longer, while thinner areas flex and shift, always seeking equilibrium. In this way, the rim is both boundary and collaborator, a quiet yet essential participant in the lake's ongoing narrative. By now, the rim feels almost alive in your awareness, a companion to the lake rather than a passive observer. Each jagged edge, each subtle fracture, each glint of mineral deposit contributes to a personality that is patient, reactive, and quietly expressive. Ask yourself, what stories could these rocks tell if they had memory? How do they record centuries of lava, heat, and gas interactions? The rim, in its steadfast presence, teaches patience and attentiveness. reminding you that even the seemingly solid and permanent is constantly in dialogue with energy, time, and motion. Occasionally, the lake asserts itself more dramatically, sending small spurts of molten rock skyward in playful eruptions that catch your attention without startling you. These bursts, while brief, reveal the constant tension beneath the crust, a negotiation between liquid heat and the solid lid above. You watch as the lava arcs gracefully through the air, glowing like miniature comets, before landing back into the surface with a satisfying hiss. Ask yourself, what dictates the timing of these eruptions, and how does each tiny burst reflect the lake's internal pulse? It is both a natural display and a gentle communication, a momentary gesture from a persistent, patient entity. The eruptions are not chaotic. They follow patterns dictated by pressure, gas concentration, and the thickness of the crust. Magma enriched with trapped gases like carbon dioxide and sulfur occasionally pushes against weaker points, creating small fountains of liquid rock. Each eruption is fleeting, lasting only seconds, yet it leaves a lasting impression on the surface, altering plates, shifting cracks, and sometimes triggering ripples across the molten sea. You notice how the lake seems to breathe through these moments, releasing pressure with elegance and rhythm rather than violence. Sometimes the eruptions produce tiny glowing droplets that bounce and spin before splashing back into the lake. These droplets are like sparks of personality, miniature expressions of the lake's restless energy. They scatter across the crust, slowly cooling and forming new textures on the surface, adding to the ever-changing mosaic of plates and cracks. Ask yourself, how many such droplets form each day, and what stories do they carry of the lake's internal currents? Each splash is a punctuation mark in the lake's long, slow narrative, a transient signature that reminds you of the constant interplay between motion and solidity. The interaction between eruptions and the surrounding crust is fascinating. When a plume of molten rock hits a thinner plate, the surface flexes and shimmers, a temporary dance of give and take between crust and magma. Thicker areas resist more, causing minor shifts in the surrounding plates, while weaker sections bend or crack to accommodate the burst. You might imagine the crust as a patient partner, allowing the lake's playful gestures while maintaining enough structure to contain the molten chaos beneath. This delicate negotiation is ongoing, a slow ballet of energy balance and adaptation. The sounds accompanying these eruptions are subtle yet captivating. Each tiny burst produces a soft hiss, a whispering sizzle as molten droplets collide with cooler surfaces. Occasionally, a deeper groaning pop resonates from the crust, signaling a minor adjustment beneath the surface. You notice that these sounds, while seemingly random, often follow the lake's underlying rhythm, mirroring the convection currents and the gentle heartbeat of molten rock below. Ask yourself, could listening closely to these subtle notes reveal patterns invisible to the eye, offering clues about the lake's hidden dynamics? Color changes during eruptions are equally mesmerizing. Molten arcs flash bright orange or yellow against the deeper reds of the surrounding lava, highlighting the transient energy of each burst. Sometimes the expelled magma forms thin, glowing threads as it arcs and stretches before landing, adding delicate filigree to the molten tapestry. These flashes are fleeting, yet they punctuate the lake's continuous surface with moments of brilliance like punctuation in an ongoing fiery story. You might imagine the lake is laughing softly, leaving sparks in the air as it performs for anyone willing to watch. Even minor eruptions can affect the immediate atmosphere. Rising heat intensifies locally, while small pockets of gas escape alongside the molten droplets. You notice slight swirls in the air, above subtle eddies that bend the light and shimmer faintly against the lake's glow. The interaction of heat, motion, and vapor adds another layer to the lake's personality, a gentle reminder that every action, however small, ripples outward in subtle but observable ways. Ask yourself, how many invisible stories are being written in these fleeting interactions, recorded only in the patterns of air, light, and movement? Over time, these eruptions contribute to the constant evolution of the lake's surface. Plates shift, new textures form, and fissures open or close, all in response to the lake's playful gestures. The eruptions, while small, are a visible expression of the internal energy that keeps the lake alive, a reminder that movement, adaptation, and release are essential to sustaining its molten personality. Watching these moments, you begin to sense a rhythm, a quiet narrative of cause and effect that connects the hidden magma with the glowing, ever-changing surface. Ultimately, the lake's eruptions are not just displays of heat and motion, they are expressions of its character. Each burst, splash, and sizzle is a whisper of life, an acknowledgement that the lake is aware of its own persistence and perhaps aware of you observing it. Ask yourself, in what ways do these small gestures teach patience, attentiveness, and the quiet appreciation of natural rhythm? The lake, in its fiery elegance, is not merely a physical phenomenon. It is a storyteller revealing itself through arcs of molten light, fleeting bursts, and the patient pulse that underlies every surface ripple. Around the lake, tiny islands of solidified lava float like miniature continents, each with its own personality, quietly drifting or anchored in place. You notice how these islands shift slowly, nudged by currents, beneath tilting and rotating in subtle ways that reveal the hidden motions of the molten heart. Some are smooth and glassy, reflecting the fiery glow like mirrors, while others are jagged, textured with the scars of past eruptions. Ask yourself, how does each island adapt to the restless energy beneath it? And could these floating plates be considered sentient in their own geological way, responding to the lake's constant pulse? The interaction between these floating islands is mesmerizing. When two plates collide gently, they may merge temporarily, forming larger rafts only to drift apart later as currents shift beneath. You see how friction and subtle pressure differences create slow rotations, tilts, and occasional minor cracking, a silent negotiation between solidified rock and molten substrate. Each movement is deliberate in its own natural logic, revealing the lake's character through the slow choreography of its surface. You might imagine the islands as actors in a patient ballet, each aware of its role in the broader performance. Temperature variations affect the behavior of these islands significantly. Hotter pockets of magma beneath thin sections can lift islands slightly, creating temporary elevation changes that ripple outward to neighboring plates. Cooler regions allow islands to settle, forming stable areas that last longer before being nudged or broken apart. You notice that the movement is not random. It is the visible outcome of convection currents below a surface, expression of processes hidden from direct view. Ask yourself, how does the lake maintain equilibrium while constantly reshaping its crust? And what lessons could these islands offer about resilience and adaptability? The surfaces of the islands reveal fascinating details. Tiny gas blisters push against the solidified rock, creating miniature domes and bubbles that appear to breathe in rhythm with the underlying lava. Cracks open and close, slowly allowing subtle glows to peek through, hinting at the liquid warmth below. You might imagine that each island has a personality, calm, adventurous, hesitant, or bold, expressed in the way it tilts, rotates, or interacts with neighbors. The lake itself seems to nurture these floating companions, giving them life and movement without a single conscious thought. Sometimes islands collide more dramatically, causing cracks to propagate across the surface. Molten streams flow into these openings, momentarily connecting separate rafts or creating temporary bridges between them. You observe how the lava accommodates these interactions with quiet patience, flowing just enough to maintain continuity while allowing individual plates to retain their distinct identities. Ask yourself, could these minor collisions serve as a metaphor for cooperation and negotiation? In nature, a reminder that even rigid structures must adapt to unseen forces. The color and glow of each island vary with its thickness and the heat beneath it. Thinner areas radiate brighter orange and red, while thicker regions appear darker, almost solemn, absorbing and reflecting light in muted tones. Occasional sparks flicker across jagged edges where pressure releases or small molten streams breach the crust, adding dynamic highlights to the otherwise steady surfaces. You notice how these subtle variations create a mosaic of living textures, a constantly evolving portrait of energy and resilience. Gases escaping through tiny fissures on the islands contribute further to their personality. Soft puffs of vapor rise and twist, occasionally forming miniature plumes that merge with larger columns above the lake. These interactions are like whispers, subtle yet expressive, connecting each floating island to the broader environment of heat motion and atmospheric flow. Ask yourself, how many microdramas are unfolding simultaneously, invisible, except to the patient observer who watches closely enough to see the dance of molten energy? Over time, the islands subtly rearrange themselves, forming temporary constellations, breaking apart and drifting into new positions. You see patterns emerge, clusters, lines, or occasional solitary rafts drifting like contemplative monks. This movement, though slow, conveys a sense of deliberation and personality, as if each island is aware of its own path and the paths of others. The lake orchestrates this ballet patiently, ensuring balance, flow, and continuity, a silent choreography of molten art and solid resilience. Ultimately, these floating islands teach you about impermanence and adaptability. Each drift, tilt, and interaction is a lesson in how systems respond to energy pressure and change. Ask yourself, what can the quiet patience of these floating plates teach you about observing life, noticing subtle rhythms, and finding harmony within constant motion? The islands are not merely rocks, they are expressive participants in the lake's ongoing story. Small yet profound expressions of a dynamic, fiery world. The lava lake is never silent, though its voice is subtle, speaking in low, constant murmurs that vibrate through the surrounding rock and air. You notice faint hissing, where gases escape through vents, soft pops when the crust flexes, and occasional groans as thicker plates shift slightly. Each sound is deliberate, a gentle punctuation of the lake's ongoing narrative. Ask yourself, if you could listen long enough, could you begin to discern patterns, perhaps even a rhythm akin to speech or music? The lake communicates not with words, but with persistent, patient signals carried through vibration, heat, and motion. Seismic instruments placed near lava lakes reveal a world of quiet, constant activity. Low-frequency tremors, sometimes imperceptible to humans, ripple through the surrounding terrain, reflecting the slow movement of magma below. You imagine these tremors as the lake's heartbeat, subtle, yet steady, a reminder of the enormous energy circulating beneath the surface. Each tremor is a gentle acknowledgement of the molten world hidden from plain sight, an invisible pulse that ties the lake to the earth itself. Ask yourself, how might these vibrations influence the rocks, gases, and even life forms nearby, nudging them in ways too subtle to notice, but profoundly connected to the lake's rhythm. You notice that the sounds above the surface, though more tangible, are equally expressive. Tiny bursts of molten rock hitting the crust create soft splashes, while fissures cracking and plates shifting add quiet percussion. Sometimes the hissing of escaping gases seems to form a continuous whisper, rising and falling, like a lullaby composed of heat pressure and motion. You might imagine that the lake is aware of your presence, allowing its voice to rise just enough to draw attention, a gentle invitation to observe and reflect. The interplay of sound and motion is deeply hypnotic. As you listen, the low hum of convection beneath the surface syncs with the occasional hiss and pop, forming a slow, meditative cadence. These vibrations can be felt faintly through your feet and hands if you are patient and attuned, a tactile reminder of the lake's persistent energy. Ask yourself, how often do natural systems communicate through subtle sensory channels, quietly sharing their existence without fanfare or spectacle? The lava lake teaches patience in listening, emphasizing that not all power announces itself loudly. Even the crust contributes to the auditory palette. As floating islands collide, flex, or tilt, they generate soft scraping noises and delicate clinks. You hear how the larger, heavier plates produce deeper, more resonant sounds, while smaller or thinner rafts give sharper, lighter notes. The interaction between solid and molten creates a layered soundscape, one that reflects both the lake's temperament and the underlying physics governing movement. You might imagine that the lake is composing an orchestral piece, with each vent plate and bubble contributing its own note. Gas plumes above the surface add another layer to the soundscape. Gentle winds carry the hissing and whispering outward, allowing you to hear subtle interactions between rising vapor and surrounding air. Occasionally, concentrated pockets of escaping gas produce a more noticeable pop or whoosh, a transient punctuation in the otherwise steady hum. You notice that these audible gestures correspond with the more visible movements of the lake's surface, a shifting plate, a rising bubble, a brief plume of vapor. Ask yourself, could the lake's voice be interpreted as a multisensory language, blending sound, motion, and heat into one continuous message? The auditory experience can be surprisingly calming. Unlike violent eruptions or thunderous lava flows, the lake's sounds are gentle, consistent, and predictable once you attune yourself. They draw attention to subtle rhythms that are often overlooked in the chaos of nature, teaching a form of quiet mindfulness. You feel yourself synchronizing your breathing, slowing your awareness, deepening, guided by the soft, persistent hum of energy beneath your feet. Occasionally, distant echoes amplify these sounds, bouncing off crater walls or nearby ridges. The effect is a delicate layering, adding depth and spatial complexity to the auditory landscape. You notice how this makes the lake feel larger, almost infinite, as if its voice stretches far beyond the visible boundaries of molten rock. Ask yourself, how might the lake's soundscape influence the behavior of other organisms, or even the microclimate in its immediate vicinity? Even subtle vibrations carry meaning and effect, reaching farther than you initially perceive. By the time you settle into observation, the lake's auditory personality becomes unmistakable. It is patient, persistent, and deliberate, a continuous dialogue conducted in hiss, pop, and groan. You realize that each sound is both a record of past events and a prelude to future movements, a delicate musical score written by molten rock heat and gas. The lake's voice, though quiet, is full of wisdom, teaching you to notice, to reflect, and to find calm in the constancy of natural rhythm. Beneath the glowing surface, the magma flows in currents, both hidden and intricate, like veins of molten energy threading through the lake's heart. You can't see them directly, but every ripple, every shift in the crust, every subtle color change hints at the movement below. Imagine the magma as a thoughtful, patient entity circulating with purpose, yet unpredictably carrying heat minerals and the weight of geologic history. Ask yourself, how does this hidden flow shape the lake's visible surface, and what might it reveal about the forces driving Earth's molten core? These currents are driven by convection, the gradual rise of hotter, less dense magma, and the descent of cooler, heavier material. In a lake this size, currents can reach speeds of a few meters per hour near the surface, while deeper flows are slower but immensely powerful, moving tons of molten rock with quiet persistence. The dynamics of these flows determine where the crust forms, where cracks appear, and where heat concentrates, creating the ever-changing mosaic of floating plates. You notice subtle correlations between surface patterns and imagined subsurface motion, as if the lake's outer personality reflects its hidden anatomy. Gas bubbles rising through magma influence these currents, forming channels that guide molten material toward vents and thinner plates. Each bubble carries a story of pressure, chemical composition, and movement, releasing heat and gas into the upper layers. You might picture these bubbles as tiny messengers, negotiating with the lake's larger currents, subtly redirecting flow and adding texture to the surface. Ask yourself, if each bubble carries a fragment of the lake's history, how many narratives are traveling invisibly beneath your gaze? At this very moment, the temperature gradient is another crucial factor. Magma at the center of the lake can exceed 200 degrees Celsius, while cooler semi-solid edges hover around 900 to 1,000 degrees. These differences drive flow patterns and create zones of activity. Some areas are turbulent, bubbling, and restless, while others are calm, allowing the crust to thicken and stabilize. You can imagine the lake as a patient choreographer, orchestrating its own patterns with meticulous care, ensuring balance and continuity despite constant motion. Mineral composition also shapes subsurface currents. Iron-rich magma tends to be denser, sinking slowly and influencing surrounding convection, while lighter, silicate-rich pockets rise more easily. Traces of magnesium, sulfur, and other elements create subtle variations in viscosity, adding layers of complexity to the flow. Ask yourself, how might these chemical personalities interact below the surface, creating hidden dramas that ripple upward and reveal themselves only through subtle visual or thermal cues? Each movement is both a statement of physics and a hint of character. Occasionally, hidden currents interact with weaknesses in the crust, causing surface shifts or small eruptions. You notice patterns. Areas above vigorous subsurface flows tend to be more fractured, with floating islands tilting or small lava fountains emerging. The lake communicates through these adjustments, translating invisible movement into visible expression. It is a quiet language, understood only by patience and attention, where motion below speaks to the surface, above in ripples, tilts, and bursts of heat. Subsurface currents also affect the distribution of color. Hotter upwellings brighten the surface with orange and yellow flashes, while cooler downwellings deepen the red or even crimson tones. You notice fleeting patterns, ephemeral yet precise, revealing the lake's hidden choreography in a way that seems almost intentional. Ask yourself, could the lake's colors be read like a map of currents, a guide to its unseen world? The dance of molten shades becomes a visual echo of hidden energy, a language that invites study and reflection. Heat distribution is not uniform, and you can see this in the subtle movement of floating islands. Some tilt or rotate in response to warmer currents, others remain more stable atop cooler regions. This interaction creates an intricate feedback loop. Currents influence the crust modulates flow, and the lake maintains its balance through continuous adjustment. You might imagine the lake as a patient teacher, showing you the interconnectedness of motion, heat, and structure without a single word. Finally, the hidden currents are deeply ancient tracing paths, carved over centuries, even millennia. Each twist, rise, and descent reflects eons of geological memory, accumulated through countless cycles of eruption, cooling, and transformation. Ask yourself how much of the lake's personality is a product of time as much as physics shaped by history in ways that are subtle yet profound. The invisible magma flowing beneath the glowing surface is a silent storyteller, carrying with it the weight of deep earth and offering lessons in persistence, patience, and the quiet power of continuous motion. The molten lake also tells its story through color, a language of heat and chemistry that shifts and pulses with every movement below the crust. Deep oranges glow steadily, while brighter yellows and almost white-hot spots flare where currents meet thinner sections or vents. Occasionally, veins of crimson or near-purple appear along fissures, marking areas where minerals like iron and magnesium concentrate, or where gases escape. Ask yourself, if color could speak, what narratives would these glowing tones share about the lake's internal personality and hidden drama? Each shift is like a word, a phrase in an ongoing fiery conversation. You notice that the surface behaves like a living canvas. Floating islands, glowing vents, and shimmering fissures interact, reflecting and refracting light in subtle ways. Colors appear to pulse rhythmically, brightening and dimming as the crust flexes and magma moves below. These visual fluctuations are not random. They are dictated by the lake's temperature flow patterns and chemical makeup. Each glowing patch, each shifting hue, is a signpost to the underlying energy and activity, a delicate expression of the lake's temperament. Temperature readings correlate closely with color intensity. The brightest yellow and white areas often indicate spots above 150 degrees Celsius, while deep orange zones hover around 1,000 degrees. Cooler edges, sometimes dark red, reveal thicker, more stabilized crust. Ask yourself, how much of the lake's personality is encoded in these subtle shades, and could careful observation of color provide clues to the invisible forces at work beneath the surface? You begin to see the lake's glow as a language of energy, an expressive spectrum that conveys mood, activity, and history. Plumes and steam rising from vents add another layer of visual expression. Vapor curls above the molten surface, bending and reflecting light in ways that create transient ribbons of glow. Occasionally, sulfur-laden steam catches the red and orange from below, forming pale yellow or greenish tints. These ephemeral patterns shift with air currents, creating a delicate choreography between color motion and chemical reaction. You might imagine that the lake is playfully painting its own environment, leaving fleeting signatures that only the attentive observer can interpret. The interplay of color and motion extends to small eruptions and splashes across the lake. When droplets of molten rock arc through the air, they momentarily brighten the surface, creating bursts of ephemeral light. Upon landing, these droplets alter the texture and tone of the crust, adding a subtle glow or darkening depending on their temperature and composition. Ask yourself, could these fleeting flashes be considered punctuation marks in the lake's ongoing story, visual exclamations in the quiet language of molten rock. Each eruption, however small, becomes part of the broader narrative. The lake's palette is influenced by mineral diversity as well. Iron-rich magma produces darker, more somber reds, while silica-heavy sections are lighter and more reflective. Occasional deposits of sulfur and other elements tint the surface, creating gentle streaks and mottled patterns that shift as the crust moves. These mineral brushstrokes enrich the visual experience, adding layers of complexity and nuance. You notice that observing these changes requires patience, a slow study that reveals how chemistry, heat, and motion collaborate to form a living painting. Light reflection adds subtle variations too. Waves of heat distort the air above the surface, bending and shimmering light, while jagged plates cast moving shadows. The result is a living, breathing canvas, where color is never static. Ask yourself how much of the lake's expressive power comes not just from raw heat, but from the delicate interaction of light surface texture and atmospheric conditions. The lake becomes a storyteller through this interplay, offering lessons in observation, patience, and the elegance of natural systems. Finally, the color itself affects perception of movement. Bright flashes draw attention to shifting islands or bubbling vents, while darker areas suggest stability and quiet patience. This dynamic creates a visual rhythm that mirrors the lake's internal flows, offering a multi-layered experience for the observer. You begin to realize that the lake's personality is inseparable from its palette. The colors, motion, and light all communicate together, a symphony of heat and energy that expresses persistence, vitality, and subtle playfulness. Occasionally, the lake surprises you with patterns in its surface, intricate swirls, and concentric rings that ripple outward like the slow heartbeat of the earth itself. These patterns form where gas pockets rise, where molten currents meet thinner crust, or where recent eruptions disturb the steady flow. Watching them, you notice that each ripple moves with a gentle intelligence, as if the lake is aware of the space it occupies and the observer watching it. Ask yourself, could these delicate motions be a form of self-expression, the lake's way of marking time and space in its own molten language? Some ripples are fleeting, vanishing within moments, while others persist, slowly spreading across the surface and influencing neighboring plates. You notice how floating islands tilt or rotate slightly as a ripple passes, responding to the subtle motion transmitted through the molten body beneath. Each interaction demonstrates the interconnectedness of the lake. Nothing exists in isolation. Every movement is both cause and effect, a quiet dialogue between surface crust and magma below. You might imagine the ripples as gentle footsteps, each leaving a trace of the lake's personality behind. Temperature and viscosity differences contribute to the behavior of these patterns. Hotter currents beneath thinner plates rise faster, generating visible domes or arcs, while cooler, denser magma stabilizes neighboring regions. Occasionally, multiple ripples intersect, creating interference patterns that shimmer like liquid lace. Ask yourself how many hidden layers of activity are encoded in these surface ripples, signaling pressure flow and chemical shifts below. Observing carefully, you can begin to read these signs as a map of the lake's unseen activity. Small eruptions often accompany ripple formations, their molten arcs punctuating the fluid design. You notice droplets bouncing and spinning across the surface, occasionally landing in alignment with the moving ripples. This adds an ephemeral choreography where solid and liquid heat and motion and even gravity participate in a subtle performance. Each splash, each tiny eruption contributes to the lake's evolving mosaic, reinforcing the sense of personality and intent behind otherwise invisible forces. The ripple patterns also interact with light in hypnotic ways. Heat waves rising from the surface distort the view, bending colors and shapes into shifting forms that mimic liquid flames or glowing smoke. Observing these visual distortions, you feel the lake's subtle rhythm resonating through the air around you. Ask yourself, could the combination of light motion and heat be the lake's way of composing a sensory language that engages all your faculties rather than relying solely on sight or touch? Each ripple becomes both signal and art. Wind adds another layer of variation. Gentle breezes bend and stretch the rising vapor, shifting the reflection of light across moving plates and altering the perceived flow of ripples. Occasionally, a stronger gust interacts with a fragile plate, tilting it slightly and creating transient waves across the lake's surface. These interactions are delicate yet expressive, a reminder that even external forces become collaborators in the lake's ongoing narrative. You might imagine the wind as an attentive partner, gently prompting the lake to display its intricate patterns in new ways. Gas plumes also influence ripple behavior. As sulfur-rich vapor escapes through vents, it creates small localized disturbances, nudging the surface and altering the direction of subtle waves. These effects, though nearly imperceptible at first glance, add complexity and depth to the overall flow, turning the lake into a multi-layered symphony of motion and energy. Ask yourself what other hidden interactions are occurring beneath your notice, silently contributing to the lake's expressive surface. Observing patiently reveals these minute communications between heat gas and liquid rock. Finally, the patterns themselves seem to carry emotion, or at least a personality you can sense if you allow yourself to slow down. Gentle concentric ripples evoke patience, while sharper, irregular arcs hint at playful energy. Some waves merge harmoniously, others collide and interfere, a subtle narrative of cooperation, conflict, and balance unfolding across a surface of fire. You realize that the lake is a patient teacher offering lessons in observation rhythm and the quiet artistry of nature, using ripples as one of its many expressive tools. Occasionally, the lava lake's surface seems to shimmer, with a rhythm all its own, a delicate pulse reflecting both heat and motion beneath the crust. You notice subtle undulations that travel across the molten expanse, hinting at currents interacting with floating islands or hidden fissures. Each shimmer is a conversation between the lake's interior energy and its fragile crust, a gentle reminder that even in constant motion patterns emerge. Ask yourself, could these rhythmic pulses be considered the lake's heartbeat, a subtle marker of its persistent life and energy? The pulses often coincide with gas release, where bubbles of carbon dioxide or sulfur dioxide rise to the surface and expand momentarily, lifting small plates or producing miniature splashes. You notice how these tiny events create concentric ripples, each expanding outward and interacting with neighboring movements. Sometimes multiple pulses intersect, creating intricate patterns reminiscent of waves colliding on a tranquil pond, except each wave here is molten, glowing, and vibrant. You might imagine that the lake is aware of its own choreography, orchestrating delicate interactions that reveal its personality to those patient enough to observe. Temperature gradients play a key role in shaping these rhythms. Hotter areas produce faster, more pronounced pulses, while cooler regions stabilize the surface, allowing slower, smoother motion. Occasionally, thin sections of crust respond more dramatically, flexing or tilting in response to the underlying surge. Ask yourself how much of the visible dance is dictated by the lake's hidden energy, and how much is a natural negotiation between heat viscosity and surface tension. Observing the pulses offers insight into a world that remains largely invisible but profoundly influential. Light adds another layer of expression to these movements. The molten glow bends and reflects on rising gas and shifting plates, creating transient patterns of orange, yellow, and red that ripple with the motion of the lake. You notice that each pulse subtly alters the brightness and tone of nearby surfaces, a visual whisper of the internal activity below. Occasionally, the interplay of shimmer and shadow creates illusions of tiny dancing forms, as if the lake is painting ephemeral characters onto its own surface. The interaction of floating islands with pulses is especially fascinating. Some plates tilt or rotate gently, responding to the wave of heat or upward surge of molten material. Others remain stable, anchoring the pattern while the surrounding surface flexes. You might think of these islands as dancers, some responding eagerly to the rhythm, others holding steady in calm observation, all part of a carefully balanced performance dictated by forces you cannot see. Gas plumes amplify the visual and rhythmic display. As bubbles reach the surface, escaping through vents, they nudge the water-like motion of the molten crust, forming small jets or eddies that enhance the pulse's visibility. Occasionally, sulfur-laden vapor creates faint yellow tints in the glow, adding nuance to the ever-changing palette. Ask yourself, could observing these interactions closely reveal hidden principles of flow, energy distribution, and chemical interplay beneath the surface? The lake communicates subtle lessons through its dance of light, heat, and motion. Even minor eruptions align with the pulse's rhythm, producing arcs of molten rock that seem choreographed rather than random. Droplets leap briefly, adding punctuation to the ongoing movement, landing with soft sizzles that echo through the surrounding crust. These arcs emphasize the lake's playful yet disciplined personality, a blend of energy release, visual storytelling, and measured control. By the time you focus fully on the shimmer and pulses, the lake feels alive in a new way, its personality expressed through heat. Motion, light, and rhythm becomes intimate, inviting quiet reflection. Ask yourself how much of this subtle orchestration is visible only to those who slow down and observe patiently, and what lessons about persistence, balance, and attentiveness could it teach? You begin to appreciate that the lake's communication is multisensory, gentle, and endlessly patient, a natural symphony written in fire. As evening falls, the ambient light shifts, and the lake's glow deepens, radiating warmth and color into the cooling air. You notice how the contrast between the molten surface and the dimming surroundings accentuates every ripple, every floating island, every flicker of gas and heat. Shadows lengthen across the jagged rim, creating a sense of scale that is both grand and intimate. Ask yourself, how does the interplay of light and darkness reveal aspects of the lake's personality that daytime observation might miss? The fiery glow becomes not just illumination, but a narrative thread drawing attention to subtle expressions of energy and movement. The temperature of the lake contrasts starkly with the night air. Cooler regions of crust retain their solidity, while exposed molten patches radiate intense heat, creating small shimmering waves above the surface. You notice faint waves of infrared light, the air above quivering with invisible warmth, bending the starlight slightly and adding a surreal quality to the scene. Each shimmer is like a sigh from the lake itself, a gentle acknowledgement of the transition from day to night from the observer's world to the lake's timeless rhythm. Gas plumes become more visible in the cooler air, curling upward in delicate spirals, reflecting the red and orange glow of molten rock below. Some plumes carry sulfur compounds, casting pale yellow-green highlights against the deep orange of the lava, creating ephemeral brushstrokes that shift with the breeze. Ask yourself, could these transient forms be considered the lake's visual language, a way of communicating not just heat and motion, but also presence and character to anyone who watches attentively? Each wisp of vapor is a gesture, a subtle expression of the lake's temperament. Floating islands respond differently in the cooler evening. Some slow their motion as viscosity increases in underlying magma, while others, still energized by hidden currents, tilt or rotate, slowly reflecting the lake's enduring activity. You might imagine that the islands are conversing quietly, with the molten heart negotiating positions, forming temporary alliances, or simply drifting in contemplative solitude. Their slow, deliberate motions mirror the patient heartbeat of the lake itself, emphasizing continuity, resilience, and adaptability. The rim of the crater takes on an almost sentient quality at dusk. Shadows dance across jagged rocks, highlighting textures and fractures that were less obvious in daylight. Heat radiates gently, interacting with the cooler night air to create subtle eddies and mirages along the edges. You notice small rock slides and settling plates, each movement a quiet response to the lake's pulse, a testament to ongoing negotiation between solid and liquid. Ask yourself, how might the lake's personality manifest differently under changing light and temperature conditions? Observing at dusk provides an intimate glimpse into a quieter, more reflective aspect of its character. Occasional minor eruptions punctuate the evening, brief arcs of molten rock lighting up the surrounding darkness. These bursts, though small, illuminate nearby islands, fissures, and vapor plumes, creating temporary highlights that emphasize the lake's dynamic energy. The visual contrast of glowing arcs against dark surroundings is hypnotic, reinforcing the sense that the lake is not merely a physical phenomenon, but a living, expressive entity. You might imagine the eruptions as tiny exclamations, playful winks, or gentle reminders of the lake's persistent vitality. The sounds of the lake also shift at night. Hissing, popping, and subtle groans become more noticeable against the quieter environment. You can detect minor vibrations through the ground, faint but persistent, echoing the lake's internal flow. Ask yourself, how does the contrast between the audible, tactile, and visual signals enhance your perception of the lake's personality? Night amplifies subtle cues, making the lake's character more tangible and immersive, revealing its patient, resilient, and sometimes playful nature. Finally, the lake at dusk invites introspection. Watching the interplay of glow-shadow movement and sound, you sense the lake's long memory and enduring presence. It is both ancient and immediate, a teacher of patience, observation, and attentiveness. Ask yourself, what personal rhythms, quiet energies, and subtle patterns in your own life might you notice if you paid the same attention to them as you do to the molten lake? The lake offers not just spectacle, but perspective, a living example of persistence, continuity, and the delicate balance between energy and form. As you linger near the lake, your focus begins to shift from individual details to the broader symphony of motion, color, and sound. The floating islands, shimmering ripples, and occasional splashes now feel like parts of a coordinated performance, each element contributing to a greater narrative of persistence and energy. Ask yourself, how does observing the whole change your perception of the lake's personality compared to focusing on isolated events. You start to sense a rhythm subtle, yet unmistakable, that ties together every movement and glow into a continuous story of molten life. The lake's surface behaves almost like a breathing organism. Crustal plates rise and fall, gently creating waves that ripple outward, while molten channels shift beneath, subtly altering the course of floating islands. Gas vents puff in measured intervals, producing soft hisses and curls of vapor that blend with the ever-present thermal shimmer. You might imagine the lake inhaling and exhaling, a slow and deliberate process that maintains its own equilibrium. Ask yourself, could the lake's continuous adjustments teach lessons about patience and balance, showing how energy flows, shifts, and reconfigures naturally over time? The interplay of light and shadow at this stage is particularly mesmerizing. Molten arcs from minor eruptions illuminate nearby fissures and islands, while deeper recesses of the lake remain dark, creating pockets of contrast that emphasize both movement and stillness. Shadows lengthen and shift as floating plates rotate, sometimes revealing textures or minor eruptions that were previously hidden. This interplay of illumination and darkness accentuates the lake's dynamic personality, a constant negotiation between visible energy and concealed potential. Color continues to express the lake's inner character. Bright yellows and near-white hot spots signal active upwellings, while deeper reds and oranges highlight calmer, cooler regions. You notice how subtle shifts in hue correspond with the movement of underlying currents, almost as if the lake is composing an ever-changing visual language. Ask yourself what hidden stories might be embedded in the patterns of color if one observes long enough to decode them. Each transition in glow and tone reflects a dialogue between heat, chemical composition, and motion, a continuous flow of information carried in liquid fire. Sound remains an essential layer of this multi-sensory experience. Hissing, groaning, and soft pops from shifting plates form a gentle percussion, while the occasional plumes of gas add whispering accents. Vibrations travel through the ground and air, subtly resonating in your body and heightening your sense of connection to the lake. Ask yourself, how does this immersive soundscape affect your perception of natural energy? And what does it reveal about the interplay of forces that remain largely hidden from sight? Listening closely allows the lake's personality to emerge fully, a patient teacher in motion and resonance. You begin to notice patterns in the motion of floating islands, ripples, and minor eruptions. Some plates drift deliberately, maintaining spacing and alignment, while others interact spontaneously, creating fleeting clusters or arcs. Minor eruptions punctuate these movements, emphasizing dynamic points in the otherwise slow, steady flow. These interactions suggest a form of intelligence, not conscious perhaps, but inherent in the system, an emergent personality shaped by energy mass and continuous adaptation. The lake's persistent energy teaches subtle lessons about resilience and continuity. No single plate ripple or eruption dominates the scene. Rather, the whole system persists through balance and interplay. Ask yourself, how does the lake's patient negotiation between movement pressure and release mirror patterns in your own life, where persistence and adjustment often outweigh abrupt force? Observing this gives a sense of calm, as if the lake's enduring personality gently whispers that balance is found in steady, thoughtful interaction rather than sudden extremes. Finally, as you absorb the collective motion, sound, and glow, the lake's personality crystallizes in your mind. It is playful, yet deliberate, patient, yet persistent, expressive without hurry, a living testament to energy balance and quiet power. The entire scene, a symphony of floating islands, ripples, plumes, colors, and vibrations, feels intimate, despite its vastness, inviting you to reflect, to wonder, and to settle into the quiet rhythm of molten time. Ask yourself what personal insights might emerge if you approach life with the same patience and attentiveness, noticing subtle currents and gentle pulses that shape the world quietly but profoundly. Now, as you sit quietly absorbing the lake's ongoing performance, you notice how even minor details contribute to the larger story. Tiny fissures glow faintly, releasing wisps of gas that curl upward and interact with the gentle evening breeze. Floating islands drift lazily, occasionally colliding or tilting their motions, subtle yet deliberate, like dancers moving in slow, careful choreography. Ask yourself, how often do you pause to notice the quiet interactions in your own surroundings, the tiny gestures that reveal character and intent? The lake, in its patient, fiery way, reminds you that even the smallest movements carry meaning. The molten currents below continue their silent work, invisible yet influential. Their slow, steady circulation drives the rhythm of the surface, shaping ripples, tilting plates, and occasionally producing minor eruptions. You imagine these currents as thoughtful guides, channeling energy with precision, balancing the lake's volatile temperament with persistence and care. Ask yourself how much of the lake's behavior is a product of hidden processes and how much is visible, a reflection of deeper patterns. Observing closely reveals that the apparent chaos is in fact a complex patient negotiation between energy mass and pressure. Gas plumes create ephemeral patterns that dance across the glowing surface, sometimes merging with vapor trails from neighboring vents, forming intricate transient designs. Shadows deepen as floating islands drift, interacting with both light and neighboring plates, casting long, undulating shapes across the molten expanse. These subtle displays reinforce the lake's personality, playful, yet deliberate, expressive, yet measured. Ask yourself, if nature could compose a symphony, could this combination of heat, motion, color, and sound be its music? A quiet celebration of persistent energy. The colors of the lake remain dynamic and mesmerizing. Bright yellows and oranges pulse with heat, while deep reds signal calmer, more stabilized regions. Occasional veins of purple or crimson hint at mineral variations, subtle markers of chemistry beneath the surface. You notice how these shades shift gently with each ripple and tilt, creating an ever-changing visual landscape. Ask yourself, what lessons can be drawn from this constant adaptation, this patient adjustment of color, motion, and energy to maintain equilibrium? Each moment is a meditation on persistence and balance. Sound continues to layer the experience. Gentle hisses, soft pops, and occasional groans echo from vents, and shifting plates blending with distant minor eruptions to create a continuous auditory tapestry. Vibrations travel through the ground, felt faintly underfoot, reminding you of the lake's hidden energy and persistence. You might imagine the lake as a storyteller, sharing tales of movement, heat, and pressure, inviting patience and reflection. Ask yourself, what stories might be unfolding beneath the surface, hidden from view, yet shaping the visible world in profound ways? As the night deepens, the lake seems to settle into a slower, more reflective rhythm. Floating islands drift with measured care, ripples expand gracefully, and minor eruptions punctuate the scene with gentle sparks. The lake's personality becomes palpable, patient, persistent, playful, and deliberate. Observing this, you feel a sense of calm, a connection to the quiet, enduring energy that flows beneath and shapes everything above. The lake teaches a final lesson in continuity and balance. Its persistent energy, subtle interactions, and patient adjustments create a dynamic system that endures despite constant flux. Ask yourself, how might you carry this patience and attentiveness into your own life, noticing subtle currents and quiet pulses that shape your world? The lake, in its fiery yet gentle way, offers a mirror of resilience and calm, a reminder that life's energy is best understood through observation, reflection, and quiet engagement. And now, as the night closes in and your attention drifts gently, allow yourself to linger in the glow of the lake, the rhythm of its motion, the melody of its sounds. Take in the full spectrum of its personality, from fiery bursts to patient stillness, and feel the lessons settle quietly within you. The lake slowly recedes from the forefront of your senses, but its energy lingers softly, like warmth in a memory or a gentle hum at the edge of hearing. Floating islands, ripples, plumes, and glowing currents fade gradually into the quiet night, leaving traces of their movement and color etched gently in your mind. You feel the patience, persistence, and balance of the lake seep into your awareness, softening your thoughts and quieting the day's chatter. Your breathing slows in rhythm with the lake's unseen heartbeat, each inhalation and exhalation a reflection of the patient flow of molten energy beneath the crust. The subtle sounds, the hisses, the soft pops, the gentle groans fade into an ambient lullaby, and you imagine the floating islands drifting into stillness, resting atop the ever-circulating magma. Shadows lengthen, colors dim, and the lake's personality, playful yet deliberate, fades like a whispered story at bedtime. Take a moment to sense the quiet connections between motion, heat, and time, letting your mind wander gently through the lake's lessons. Notice how even the smallest details, the rising plumes, shifting plates, or fleeting glows, reveal persistence, adaptability, and balance, quietly reminding you that change and continuity coexist in harmony. If you've enjoyed this journey, I'd be quietly grateful if you'd give this video a like or tap that subscribe button for more peaceful explorations with the Sleepy Scientist. It helps more than you might imagine. And before you drift off, I'd still love to know, where in the world are you listening? From what time it is there? Leave a comment if you're feeling cozy enough to share. It's always a quiet joy to see this sleepy little community ripple across time zones and continents. Good night, sweet dreams.